Hi again, I'm Kortsch from the Monetary Trust Initiative. I'd like to talk some more about inequality. I know I've talked about this before, but I think the reasons behind it, or what it represents, is one of the big reasons that we've seen the change in administration and why Donald Trump won the presidency. Here's a short activated chart that shows you what has happened in the last several decades. This was done by the Financial Times data team based on statistics gathered by the Pew Research Center from their December 2015 report. So let me explain this chart a bit. I know it's very fast. So the blue line represents the state of affairs in 1971. Then as you go on, initially it's decade by decade, so 71, 81, 91. And then gets a little tighter in the year 2000s and ends in 2015. Each bar is the percentage of people making that amount as seen on the right-hand scale with the income at the bottom. Okay? The bars are in $5,000 increments for annual income. And notice the decrease in the middle class. That really is the prime point I'm trying to push here. Notice that there's a huge leap also of those making more than $200,000. Oh, by the way, this has nothing to do with inflation. Okay, all the dollars are an equal value of 2014 dollars. So don't come back to me and say, oh yeah, no, this is just because of inflation. No, it's not. These are hard dollars, 2014 dollars. The middle income households went from 61% in 1971 to only about 50% today. All right? Now, I don't mind those who are more successful than I am, okay? As long as I know that there's a path for me to also get to the same place. Is that path still there? Let me show you the activated chart again so that this time you understand more of what happens there. Alrighty, well, there's a simple visual on inequality. What is it caused by? Well, there are many reasons. But I want to home in on just one aspect, which is the financial industry. I know this globalization, I know this technology, I know there are all sorts of other aspects, and I don't want to argue with those. This one issue, because really monetary trust, that's what we're talking about, right, is the financial industry. As a percentage of GDP paid to the financial industry in the US, here's a chart. This chart is by Thomas Philippon, and by the way, it's on dozens of sites, both left and right wing politically, so it's not that it's biased this way or that. And you see the huge increase as a percentage of the income that has gone to the financial industry. Why? Why are we seeing this tremendous financialization, oh my goodness, a $63 word, of our economy? What is that all about? Why is there an increase in the income for the finance sector when, look at IT, okay? Prices are dropping all over. Are you paying the same amount for your computer now as then? So many of these services that we are seeing are dropping in price because we are able to computerize it. Why is the opposite happening to our finance industry? Shouldn't competition bring these prices down? When we have all sorts of software today that can perform or many of the functions that these people are doing. I want to tell you that I believe a lot of it has to do with rent seeking. That is a really weird word. We know what rent is when we own a house and we rent it out to somebody and we get money for it. Rent seeking is an economic term. That's what we call it. I can't remember who came up with the term first. I wish they'd have come up with a different word, but that's the word that we use. Here's the definition. It's obtaining excess income without adding any wealth creation, and doing that through manipulating social and political factors. Okay? Primarily political. By the way, there's more rent seeking in this country than in any other country in the world. It's not that we're worse. It's not that we're more stupid. It's not any of those things. The problem is we are economically the most powerful country in the world, and therefore the amount of extra rent, the amount of arbitrary income that I can gain through a very tiny blip in the law is huge in comparison to, say, Canada or even Germany, or let's go to Italy or France or some other country, or England. Those economies are so much smaller that it simply is not worth it for me as a company to attempt to lobby the politicians to create an act that favors me. But in this country, oh my goodness, this is really worth it. Here's a chart of the number of lobbyists and of the amounts of money that we have spent over the last good number of years. In a nutshell, there's no sense going through the details, but in a nutshell, we're spending $3 billion a year, and we have 11,000 registered lobbyists. You did get that word, didn't you? Registered. There are a lot of people who are lobbying, but they don't. But unless it's a full-time job, you don't have to register. So on K Street, which is lobby headquarters in Washington, D.C., there's 11,000 of them. Go have lunch in a restaurant there somewhere, and probably the table next to you, they're discussing one of these lobbying aspects. All right. Finance, that's what we're talking about, and the finance industry. Broadly speaking, year after year after year, the finance industry is a top spender of these $3 billion. This is an enormous amount of money. And let me tell you, they would not be spending the money if they weren't getting a larger return. And the return is probably at least 10 to 1, if not more. Okay? One of the biggest aspects of the result of that lobbying is the extraordinary privilege that banks have of being able to create money. Now, I've gone through this over and over again in different videos. I don't want to spend a whole bunch of time on it, but if you don't understand that concept, please go back and look at some of the older videos, and you'll see where I go into detail as to what this is all about, quote you papers by eminent economists saying this is true. Our money does not come from the Federal Reserve Bank. Our money comes from your bank around the corner when you take out a loan. Okay. That aspect, then this, back to lobbying and how our monetary system works, brings me to QE, quantitative easing. Since the Great Recession of 2007 and 8, the Fed has pumped roughly just under $4 trillion into Wall Street. Basically nothing has come into Main Street, all right? And the purpose of this is to, quote, preserve the financial highway. Now, I do believe that's really important, okay? Don't get me wrong. Think of it like driving a car. Having a car is really great, but if you don't have a highway, you can't drive anywhere. And it's the same with our banking system. We have money, we have loans, we have accounts. If we didn't have banks that were functioning, it's like a highway, your car wouldn't go anywhere, your money wouldn't be able to move freely. So I understand that we have to preserve that. All right? So during the Great Recession, the banks were going bust because their loans were not being repaid. Therefore, what are the options? Well, you could pay the banks to cover the loan foreclosures, and that's what we did. Or you could pay those not able to pay the loans, that's Main Street, and the banks would still have been covered. But we chose not to do that. I wonder if that had anything to do with $3 billion in lobbying fees. What do you think? You tell me. I can't give you the direct answer. Well, you obviously know where I'm going. Yes, that's what I think it's all about. All right. By the way, and a huge chunk of the money that we put out went to the bosses because they were so smart. We had to have them. You're going, whoa, excuse me. Aren't those the people that got us into that problem to begin with? So now we had to pay them millions of dollars because they're so smart, so we had to keep them. Yeah. Am I confused about that logic? I don't think so. Back to lobbying. QE, by the way, was the biggest source of inequality over the last 10 years. I've been saying that for years. I was at a conference some time ago where a Fed spokesman spoke, and I asked some questions in public afterwards, which were answered nicely. And then I went to him privately, and he turned to me and he says, "You are absolutely right. The biggest source of inequality in this country over the last few years has been our QE program." I didn't challenge him, but my thought was, well, why didn't you say that in public? How did that work? Well, and again, I went through that a little bit on some of the previous videos, but the QE program, these were asset purchases. So what happened, let's say treasuries, for instance, the Federal Reserve created money and then bought these assets from the banks, but they went into the reserve accounts. They never hit Main Street, okay? Many people still to this day say, well, yeah, the Fed printed money. And I want to argue with that concept. No, the Fed didn't, quote, print money the way most people think. That's why we haven't seen any inflation, okay? The $3.5 trillion, quote, printed under the fractional reserve system that we currently have here in the US, of which about 10% is in reserve, would be the equivalent of $35 trillion. But they didn't end up on Main Street. No, none of that money did. I didn't get any of that money. Did you get any of that money? That is the whole purpose of what I'm trying to explain in these videos of the Chicago Plan, which is sovereign or public money, such as US notes in our history. Okay? It's not, quote, printing money the way we talk about the Fed doing it, but it's the Treasury taking over the role of the money creation of the private banking system. Ladies and gentlemen, the amount of inequality that we have produced over these last few years would be greatly decreased, not by increasing the taxation on the rich, not by pushing them down, but by equalizing all opportunity. I think those who do not have as much as the top 1% aren't asking for their money. I'm not asking for their money. I'm definitely not in that percentage, okay? I'm asking for an equal opportunity. And the Chicago Plan gives that through sovereign money, through public money. That's really what I want to say about inequality. Just on a personal note, I just came back recently from Europe. I was in London, Amsterdam, and Paris. And the central banks of England, Holland, and Iceland jointly planned a conference on the title was The Role of Money in the Modern Economy. And I was one of 30 people that they invited from around the world in a roundtable discussion to look at this. I was very honored. Europe understands these issues more than we do because the pressure is there, is greater. We seem to be doing well. And externally, I would agree we are. When I look, especially when I look at the government statistics with respect to inflation and unemployment, we seem to be doing really well. And I don't want to get in on this now because this really is about inequality. But by the way, right now, our formal unemployment rate, I believe, is 4.7%, 4.8% right now while we're shooting this. But if we were to include the number of people who have dropped out of the those listed as being unemployed because of the decrease in the participation rate of the employed, our actual rate right now today would be 10%. So, got to watch these numbers, all right? I want to end with a $63 word, hypernormalization. Good Lord, what in the world does that mean? That's not a normal word used. I realize it comes from an author, Alexei Yurchak, who was he used this to describe the Russian system, the communist system, as it was crumbling. And in his book, he argued that everyone knew the system was failing, but no one could imagine an alternative to the status quo. And so politicians and citizens were resigned to maintaining the pretense of a functioning society. I think from an economic perspective, I believe, maybe it's not quite that bad, but I believe that's where we're at. Around the edges, there's an awful lot of crumbling that is occurring. In the center, yes, we look at the numbers, like I just said, low inflation, low unemployment rate, supposedly. Is that an American or a Canadian or a European form of hypernormalization, where we insist we're doing okay, we're doing okay, we're doing okay, we're doing okay, because we can't seem to come up with workable alternatives. There are workable alternatives. We've seen them before here in this country. Be encouraged. I believe we can do it again. Thank you. I'm Kortsch from the Monetary Trust Initiative.